Welcome to Krown Gridiron Nation, everyone. I'm Jim Mullen. Along with the ride is Gord Randall and Mike Hogan in Toronto. But now it's time to get right to it on our 2-minute offense. A kind of quiet day for Jesse Luketa. Just 2 solos. Theo Johnson with another catch from that tight end position as Penn State takes it over Villanova 38-17. John Mechie III, 30th at NCAA receiving, the #1 target though on the #1 team. Alabama proves it again in a smoke show over Southern Miss. Good stats, good developments. Results not yet so far for Curtis Rourke. He was 20 of 29 for 166. Did serve up a pick, could not stretch the field versus Northwestern. Ottawa Redblacks draft Alonzo Adai lost in a squeaker to #9. Oklahoma did score 9 tackles on the day. Windsor, Ontario senior receiver Dominic Johnson continues to produce 4 receptions for 38 yards in a 1-point win for Buffalo over Old Dominion. Running back Chase Brown did not play, but his brother Sidney sure did on D. 7 tackles for the London, Ontario native for the Illini as they fall just short to Purdue. The Lachine Machine, Enoch McConzo with 4 tackles and a stuff as the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers cruised to an easy win over UMass. Jeffrey Cantonar-Coup with 6 tackles and a half sack as the Syracuse Orange score an upset win over Liberty. Daniel Joseph with 2 tackles for NC State as they score the upset win over Clemson. Adjo dressed, but we didn't see him. Wake Forest with a comfortable win over Virginia. Toronto Argonauts draft pick Luigi Villain continues to impress in his senior campaign. 2 solos, a sack, and a stuff. A big win for Nick Mardner and the Hawaii Warriors. Nick Mardner 7th in NCAA yards as Hawaii scores a 41-21 win over New Mexico State. Worth mentioning, Sage Dockstader, 37th start at offensive tackle. He's a Toronto Argonauts draft pick. How about that, Mike? If there is one area Canadians have dominated over the last few years in the NCAA, it is on the defensive line. Take a look at this. So what positions do Canadians dominate in Division I? It's defensive linemen. 39 D linemen, 7 DNs in that total in at #1. Offensive linemen, always a strong suit of football in Canada. Defensive backs with 21. Receivers led by the likes of John Mechie III and Nick Mardner in at 20. Linebackers in at 10. We should note that there are 8 running backs in D1 from Canada, 7 quarterbacks. So, guys, we've seen that defensive line is an area where Canadians represent in the NC2A. Gord, who is at the top of the class for you?
Well, I would say one of the more exciting young talents for Canadian defensive line talent has got to be Akeem Messidor out of West Virginia. He burst onto the scene last year as a true freshman, making an impact right away in Big 12 football as a true freshman. Very impressive. This year as a sophomore, he's in more of a part-time role still this year. Just the 1 sack on the season so far. So he's yet to really get going. But you can see burst, you can see explosion, and we haven't seen a top-end Canadian pass rush prospect come out of a Power 5 conference in a number of years. So he's a guy that could potentially be a big impact maker if he makes it up to the CFL, because you can see that he's got juice behind his game.
Mike, you're an employee of the Toronto Argonauts. You dream in double blue. You were in the Zoom room, the draft room for those Argos. Tell me who you picked. He was a defensive lineman, and why?
Well, we're kind of partial to Luigi Villain from Wake Forest. We selected him in the 3rd round this year. He's a kid who, when he left high school, was the #2 rated prospect in the country behind Chuba Hubbard. He decided to go to Michigan and redshirted as a freshman, and then he got hurt, and then he got hurt again, and he got hurt again. And it was a string of injuries that really caused him to set back in his development. And when you're a program like Michigan, you're gonna have a nonstop flood of 5-star recruits coming in, so he fell back on the depth chart. He's transferred to Wake Forest. He's looking really good right now. In fact, maybe the only bad thing about him going to Wake Forest and playing is he's playing so well that maybe the NFL puts him back on the radar. So he's somebody that we drafted. He's one of those talented D linemen that you spoke of playing right now in the NC2A, and we're really happy to have him in our organization.
And when you want to look out west and look at some other prospects, another more senior guy who's getting his last kick at the can this fall is Mohamed Diallo. Now, Diallo has bounced around a little bit. He started at Texas A&M, actually. Then he ended up at Central Michigan for a couple years, where he really blossomed into not just a starter, but a star in the mid-major MAC conference. Now he's transitioned back to the Pac-12 into a Power 5 conference. And it took him a couple games to kind of get his feet underneath him, but he really broke out in a big way this last week, recording a sack and being second on the team in tackles in their loss at Oregon, a bona fide top 10, maybe even top 5 team. So that was a really big step in the right direction for Diallo. He's another name to keep on the radar as he continues to transition into a higher level of play. If he continues to show out, he may also end up with a legitimate shot in the NFL when all is said and done.
So the question of the day is, would we see any of the big guys in our stateside 5? He took a week off the list. He is back. It's John Mechie III of the Alabama Crimson Tide. 7 receptions for 45 yards, the reliable go-to target. It is Toronto's Mohamed Diallo with the Arizona Wildcats. He gets to do the safety dance at number 4. Sam Emelis making his first appearance in the 5 this year. 2 receptions, 69 yards, but he found the promised land for Louisiana Tech. Which Brown brother is it this week? It is Sidney Brown of the Illini. He led the team in tackles with 7 and had a massive hit. And sophomore Nick Mardner is on a tear. 4 receptions, 120 yards, and a touchdown, by far and away the top Canadian receiver in the NC2A. Coming up, U Sports just got a whole lot more interesting. We've got walk-off touchdowns, we've got some giant upsets, and we've got some great individual performances in our U Sports 3-minute warning. Battle of Waterloo, Trey Ford, he passed for 226, threw for a TD, ran for another 169. Twin brother Tyrell also threw in an INT. Western and Guelph. Western's running game was about 1/4 of what it was against McMaster last week. This was a field goal contest, and Mustang kicker Brian Garrity was 4 for 4 until the upright won. Calgary quarterback Josiah Joseph threw for 451 yards, 400 of which were delivered to someone named Philpott. More on that later. Regina and Manitoba. The Bisons were trailing throughout until early in the 4th, until this Brock Gowanlock scoop and score. He had 7 tackles and 1.5 TFL as well. Olivier Waugh for the Heck Creighton start, engraving that trophy now. 580 yards passing, 5 touchdown passes, no pick, and another game winner, this time in overtime, to Jalen Greaves. How about that? Down east we go. Cole Esterbrooks, 15 carries, 138 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jaden White-Frayne, 5.5 tackles. This guy had 4 pass breakups. Acadia gets their first win. Let's first start with the Canada West. What do those 3 teams with 1-0 records share in common? They were all the home teams in week 1. Expect some shifting coming up way out west next week. Off to the OUA, and there are 4 teams that are undefeated. First of all, let's start in the West with Waterloo and Guelph after that surprising win over Western. And in the East, it's the Queens Gales with a 2-0 record. Toronto with that 1-0 record after their narrow 1-point win over Ottawa. In the Q, Montreal and Concordia are tied with 3-1 records, but of course Concordia owns the tiebreaker over the Caribbean after that win at Sept. Laval ready to strike with their 2-2 record. And in the AUS, it is the Mount Allison Mounties with a 2-0 record. St. Mary's Huskies off to a surprisingly slow start. In Calgary, it looks like the Philpott twins are poised to blow the doors off some secondaries across the Canada West and beyond, Gord.
Yeah, no kidding. What an opening weekend for the Philpotts as the pair combined for over 400 yards receiving in a Calgary victory versus the Saskatchewan Huskies, who I think a lot of prognosticators would probably predict is the second best team in the Canada West and their biggest challenger for the crown. So a statement opening win for the Dinos. And I should point out Josiah Joseph was really sharp, just under 500 yards on the day total for him, distributing the ball around that offense. And with the Philpotts, it's unfortunate. It's tough not to talk about the two of them kind of in the same breath instead of differentiating between the two of them. But it's really pick your poison because they can both hurt you in a lot of the same ways. And it's legitimately like having a mirror image on opposite sides of the formation or right beside each other, no matter how they line up. And Pat Sheehan, the offensive coordinator there at Calgary, has developed an offense that does a really good job of moving them around, finding ways to get both of them the ball in space, giving them lots of opportunities. And we saw what they could do with it. They look like they're primed for a monster season out west. And Mike asked the question last week, which twins are going to turn heads first? Well, I would say first strike goes to the Philpotts.
Mike, the Cardiac Stingers, also known as that team from Concordia, continue to win in unbelievable ways, always by 3 points. Storybook seasons like this are very rare, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And, you know, when you're putting up 580 yards passing and 5 touchdowns without a pick, that'll help you win. But it's been an interesting season. You mentioned the 3 threes that they've had, beating Montreal and then beating McGill in overtime and then Sherbrooke in overtime last week. You know, I think there's something to this. And, you know, you get confidence with victories like this. And I remember doing play-by-play for Laurier back in 2004. They were not the favorites to get to the Yates Cup, at least win the Yates Cup that year. But they had a couple of blowout wins early. Then they beat Western at Western by 4. It was the first time they had beat them in a decade. Then the next week they beat the favorites. That was the Jesse Lumsden McMaster team. They beat them by 3 on a Brian Devlin last-minute field goal. That gave them the confidence. That started the roll. Now, will that happen to Concordia? I still see it being another rock fight, as you like to call it, between Montreal and Laval and the Dunsmore. But boy, I think that Concordia is going to get as much mentally and in terms of confidence out of this win as they are just the 2 points.
The OUA West is starting to look a lot like the Canada West, a 6-team group where any team can beat anyone on any given week. The first piece of evidence is the number 1 Western Mustangs falling on the road to Guelph, Mike.
Yeah, I don't know how many people saw that. I know especially after the week 1 dominant performance by Western over Mac, I didn't see it coming. But that doink that we heard off the upright in that last minute field goal attempt, or at least late field goal attempt by Western that clanged off the left upright, that might have long-term repercussions in terms of the seeding because Guelph has just stolen 2 points that I don't think anybody expected them to get. All of a sudden now in this 5-team race for 4 playoff spots, and if you concede that Waterloo and Western are going to get 2 of them, that win for Guelph really helps them solidify their spot in the playoffs. How big now does the McMaster game versus Laurier become in 3 weeks' time? That game last week is going to have major repercussions going forward.
Coming up, it's our Weekend Warriors. Welcome back, everyone. Here are your CJFL standings. Weekend Warriors, the home of where we turn the spotlight onto unheralded performances. First to you, Gord.
My Weekend Warrior is a guy that we have tried to herald a little bit on this program, but he put up another triple-digit receiving yard performance this past week in a win for the Rainbow Warriors, and that's Nick Mardner. Nick Mardner now up to 7th in the entire country in receiving yards at 476. He's added 3 touchdowns to go along with that. And this is a guy that if he continues to put up numbers like this, we may even start hearing his name tossed around in the Biletnikoff conversation as one of the top wide receivers in the country. But even if he doesn't end up dealing deep into that conversation, Martiner is off to a fantastic start. He is clearly Hawaii's guy. As we spoke of last week, it's going to be tough to push his candidacy because nobody's really watching that team. They've won 2 games and lost 3. The only 2 wins were against FCS teams. That's going to be a challenge for him, but that doesn't take away from the individual performance. Nick Martiner by far is my weekend warrior.
I'm going to go off the board a little bit and really go off the board because we usually talk about the unsung heroes here in terms of players, but my weekend warrior is Marcel Belfait, head coach at Ottawa, who went through as tough a coaching week as I could possibly imagine somebody going through. He's coached, Vanier Cup level. He's won a Vanier Cup as a coach. He's been a pro coach. He's been an interim head coach in the CFL and a coordinator and a positional coach. But having to deal with the death of a player, when Francis Perron passed away, that just threw everything that he had planned for the next week just out the window, because I think people forget to a degree how important these coaches are to the players as young men, away from home perhaps for the first time. They take a father figure role in a lot of cases. They just getting off the bus for Ottawa at Queens was going to be tough enough, and I think they did a phenomenal job getting ready to play under the worst possible circumstances. So congratulations, Coach Belfait.
Triple W2K, what do we want to know about this coming weekend, Michael?
I'm going to stick with the GGs, and they have Panda this week against Carleton, which over the last few years has really become the big event, even more so than the Vanier Cup in a lot of ways, in university football in this country. And there's obviously going to be a pall over it this year, and I'm hoping that Ottawa can find its way into becoming competitive in this game. They weren't last week, but this game has provided us with so many great moments, so many fantastically entertaining moments over the year. I hope we can get that again. I hope that Ottawa, if they were to win this, my God, that would be a great story. But I'm just hoping that we get some sort of fantastic game out of one of the most looked forward to games, I guess, on the U Sports calendar.
What I want to know is, can NC State avoid a letdown after their huge takedown of Clemson last weekend and keep the roll going? They snuck into the top 25. They're newly ranked. They've spent just a single week in the top 25 last year and then immediately lost again and fell back out. They can't afford to do that this year, and they do get a little bit of a breather in a mid-major Louisiana Tech team that I should point out also features 2 Canadians starting on offense. But this NC State team, led by Daniel Joseph, the BC Lions first-round pick on the defensive line, has been trending in the right direction for a couple of years now, and it's now time for them to take that next step. It looks like they may have done that in taking down Clemson, so they just have to keep the positive momentum going. So what I'm watching not only is for the Canadians on both sides of this one, especially the O-line, D-line matchup, but I'm watching to see if NC State can keep that positive momentum going and make themselves a legitimate ACC title contender.
Picks of the week coming up next. Welcome back, everyone. Football Canada unveiled their alternate logo Tuesday. Tsleil-Waututh artist Colton Casalis Grant redesigned the current Football Canada logo with a story that talks about youth development, mentorship, and success. Merchandise will be made available during football weekend in Canada starting October 15th. The key to this is that all proceeds will go to benefit Indigenous football development across Canada. For more information, go to footballcanada.com. Welcome back, everyone. Let's take a look at our U Sports picks of the week. We haven't been very good in prognosticating. I will wear that one. Here are our 3 games. It's the 52nd Panda game between Ottawa and Carleton is a 4.5-point favorite. Frankly, this game is bigger than the Vanier, and it sold out 2 weeks in advance, even though there were only 15,000 tickets available due to COVID. It goes Saturday at noon Eastern time. The key to this is the over-under. You got to take the over because neither of these teams finish well in the red zone. 2 touchdowns and 6 tries for Carleton, and 2 touchdowns in 4 tries for Ottawa. Whoever finishes their drives is going to win this Panda game. Saskatchewan 5-point favorites at UBC at Thunderbird Stadium. Veterans versus a team trying to find themselves. Saskatchewan with that senior talent with Colton Klassen, the receiver who had a 100-yard day versus Calgary, and Adam Mackart, who is an early season favorite for the Heck Creighton Award at running back. 7 o'clock kickoff on Friday. I'd say take the over because both of these secondaries were torched in week 1. Okay, off to NCAA picks. I think this has been a humbling experience for all involved so far this year with both U Sports and NCAA selections. Well, let's give it another week, Gord.
Here's your guaranteed pick to bet against. I've actually got 2 picks of the week, so 2 games for you to absolutely avoid. Number 1, I'm going to take West Virginia -7. They're hosting Texas Tech. Now, Texas Tech lost their starting quarterback, Tyler Shaw, last week. 6 weeks he is out. They're going to be starting a new quarterback. They are also reeling. They just gave up a 70 burger against the Texas Longhorns. The West Virginia Mountaineers, they need a Big 12 win here. They've had a tough start to their schedule. They're currently sitting 9th in the Big 12 standings early on. They need a W. I think they're going to come out big, and I think they're going to pounce on Texas Tech and bury them. I like them -7. The other line that I like this week is Syracuse is a 4.5-point dog traveling to Florida State, and a Florida State team that has struggled out of the gate this year. Now, Syracuse, I mentioned last week, I felt had been struggling. They made a quarterback change, and it seemed to pay off for them last week in a big win against Liberty. I want to see if they're going to take the next step here, but the way Florida State's been playing has not been impressive to me. I like them plus the 4.5. That's my dog pick of the week.
I'm going to go big. What's the old line? Go big or go home. Let's go with number 1 versus number 12 in the country. It's Alabama and Ole Miss, and there's a huge Canadian content factor to this game as well. John Mechie III, obviously from Brampton, is the leading receiver for Alabama in receptions, not yards, which is maybe not what we expected. He's become the go-to guy. He's had 24 catches so far in 4 games, 6 a game, which is twice as many as anybody else on the Crimson Tide. And he may be matched up against a Canadian on the corner in Dean Leonard, a Calgary native who transferred from Calgary down to Ole Miss. And he had been the starting cornerback, had fallen out of the starting lineup, and I'm curious to see if he gets the start this week, which he didn't last week. He could be matched up on Mechie. He's a Hamilton Ticats draft pick. And also in this game is Tavius Robinson, a Guelph native who played with the Griffins before transferring to Ole Miss, and he's back. He finally got back in the lineup last week against Tulane after missing the first couple of games of the season. So he's back. We've got 3 key players potentially in this game, and boy, if you bet against Alabama doing anything at any time, probably not the smart thing to do. So let's go with the Tide on this one.
For everyone on Krown Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullen saying let's get out to the game.